I think I'm gonna go like this the entire time because I got the creepy Elmos in the back just peering perfectly over. I mean, I could back up a little bit. What is going
No,
on, everyone? We're back in this week in the House of Fraud. I am Brian, as always, joined by Jordan. What's happening today?
it's actually my birthday. I'm turning the big 40 today, so
Actually,
that's a
I
thing.
knew that. Well, I knew that, but I'm awful and forgot. I had the
It
notification.
is
I was about to text you. I'm like, I'll just say it first thing when we hop on, and then I'm just the worst.
it's
So
okay
happy
because it
birthday.
is thank you. It is still 8 a.m. on my side, and I'm just getting up and getting the day going. I've done a little bit of chores, so yeah. How are you, man?
I am good as always. Living life of chaos with two kids and bouncing around, recordings, editing. One of my goals this year, it is getting on more recordings outside of what I'm producing. So it seemed to come in like ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
Where I put it out on LinkedIn. I was like, "Hey, one simple goal I have on this year is to be on more recordings than I was last year. If you're looking to launch something, I'll be your first guest. If you have something running, webinar, whatever, hit me up. I'm just looking to do more." So they've seemed to come in ebb and flows. In
Yeah,
one
mine
month,
too.
I probably spoke more than all of last year. So I was like, all right, quick hit, big win. Then I did less scheduling because baby number 2 came, so I was like, "I can't really do much." And then this week and next week, I have a couple internal talks, and a couple webinars. I probably have 4 different talks, I think 2 and 2 of each
Yeah,
this week and next week.
I saw you did a one with Incognia like not that long ago, right? I think they just reposted some of the clips from it like this week.
They reposted it. That was with, Marketplace Risk a couple months ago. I don't even remember at this point, but it was a good one. Kind of talking a lot of one of the major themes was build versus buy, which is always a topic of conversation because companies think they can build and then they
Always.
go nowhere. And then so
We're
it's
doing that
also
right
like the
now.
argument. It's the argument of like a lot of vendors have those. It's like it's we talked about retail last week. It's like you walk into the store and you're like, "Hey, Jordan, do you need any help?" And you're like, "No, no, no, I'm good. I'm just looking." But then you're like, "I do need help, but I can't ask them anymore because
So
I already insulted and walk away." And that's kind of like build versus buy of what happens a lot initially.
so that's funny because, when I used to work retail back in a previous life, we our store did not allow you to ask yes, no question at all because they didn't want a no to come out of the customer's mouth. Because say no 3 times, start to develop a
Yeah,
negative,
micro
impression of your
yeses,
experience.
momentum.
Yeah. Yeah, so we would say, "Hey, let us know if you need anything." And then say, "Okay, thank you," which turns that into a positive. And then it kind
Yeah,
of breaks the wall down a little bit so people aren't as scared. But the build versus buy is crazy because like right now we're overhauling our OFAC list and like our designated nationals to make sure like we have it a little more accurate. We've done some pretty light matching before, but I'm all about like let's just buy like a product like Bridger from like not Lexus that like just does it, like that's what
yeah,
they do. We'll ping them on these orders and then we'll do it. And like, for countries and stuff, it's pretty easy because like my fraud tool does it automatically for us. We can just block designated country if we need to. But for like designated national, like individual, that's a little harder because names are pretty generic. So if you're trying to just build it yourself and just do simple logic, it it doesn't work very well, especially if you bring in like address and you format
yeah.
the address
We would
one
see
character
that in one
wrong.
company I worked at of like just a general name match. So you have certain people that are just causing certain names are causing a lot of noise within the community and within our operation flows as a whole. So that was always a challenge within of like Michael Smith, Brian Davis. It's like those are getting flagged. And
Yep.
then if you the company I worked for was US only, so we were only focused on really US basic names within there. So if you open it up and if you are a global company and you are working with whether it's merchants, whether it's onboarding customers and consumers, when you open up to global, like that is just so much more noise depending on what countries and industries you're in. Because there's some very, very widely used names across multiple countries and nationalities, not just a single country.
Oh. So, what's been going on this week in the house, man?
What's happening in the week in this house? It's like sometimes when you ask me that, because I also have like a lot of conversations with people. Like part of like the onboarding within people is I give them the option to connect with me. I don't like when they join. I'm not saying, hey, you have to meet with me or else you're gone, or else you can't be like a part of it. Just giving them an option. One, if I haven't met them personally, it's like, "Hey, let's connect, love to learn about your story, but also show you around." And people have different goals ultimately of coming here.
Yeah.
So part of, like, me and the onboarding experience is I might have a different perspective of what success looks like by joining this community than you do. But if I'm able to meet people, I don't need to generalize of, like, "Here's 3 different paths that this could be helpful for you." It is, "Oh, you wanna meet people? Alright, well, we have a networking coming up in a few weeks. We have the monthly matchmaking, which will kick off again in a couple weeks. And you know what? You're meeting me, and what are you really trying to look for? What are you really interested in? I'll connect you to 1, 2 people in the community." I think more than 2 people starts to overwhelm people, so I try to get, like, these micro bits of introduce them to someone, then check in. There might be someone else to connect with. So if they're looking for relationships, then that's much more helpful than me being like, well, here's you can meet people, you can consume content, or you can help be a voice within the community, whether it's meeting people yourself, coaching, educating, or creating content, hopping on one of our hot seats, expert AMAs, micro classes, whatever it may be. So the quicker I'm able to connect with people and they share really what they're looking for, I can then tailor the experience for them. So that gives me like when you say like what's going on this week, I like break down those. It usually falls because of the community draws people in a certain part of their career, usually manager plus. It is relationships is a huge piece. You don't really come to a community seeking like this identity around it without being like, well, who else is here? That's the curiosity piece of it. Like, who else is really here? Especially since we're designed to kind of stay small and only on board about 10, 15 people a month. It makes it a little bit more of like a slow roll of bringing people in. Also allows me to onboard people. So, um, there's kind of been two themes this week. One I'm noticing outside is like first party fraud. A lot of people are talking. It's like the
Yeah.
last week or two, first party fraud is taking over the theme of the moment. Not necessarily new. The tactics and abuse types aren't really necessarily new, but I feel like it's ramping up at least publicly. I know privately it's never really gone away, but once you start getting these public conversations, having webinars, people creating content, and some companies trying to position themselves of specifically solving that. Um, I say that because someone hopped on one of my posts. I wrote something on first party fraud because I write about what's top of mind for me a lot. If I'm having a lot of first party fraud conversations, I have experiences. I probably have opinions. So there are companies now trying to
So
position themselves out there, but I'm curious what they really because it's like if I ask you, like, what's first party fraud mean to you?
the friendly fraud discussion is super interesting because just last week, one of the major card networks reached out to me, wanted to do an episode to correct some misconceptions that they're seeing happening around some of the changes to chargeback policies that are happening on their network. And I during that exploratory call, I mentioned that like when I was talking to Just and I did that episode, we in like late last year, we had talked about 36% of all fraud chargebacks are friendly fraud. And they actually were taken aback by that and said that they're seeing in the high 70s being more friendly fraud. And that for me is crazy. If that, I mean, because they're a network saying it, so they have to have some pretty reliable data. And if more than 70% of all fraud claims are fake, we need there needs to be a serious reckoning happening like right now. Like that's it's organized straight up, you know. And the
Yeah.
consumer, is getting away with something that we need a drastic change overnight. So what do you think about that?
I think about it in 3 ways. One is first way is the easiest bit is what can I do to classify it as that, and
Yeah.
what data points are they saying, "This is how we know this is first party fraud?" Because that's one of the hardest parts is it's being categorized as fraud a lot of times within the chargeback reason codes you get. So then what is the effort and time that goes into actually analyzing it? Is it worth it of a manual team to go in and say, "Hey, these all came back as fraudulent chargeback reason codes?" Your scale. Obviously, if you're a company that are like, "We have high ticket, we get 50 a month," then that's different than low ticket, we get hundreds a month plus, and the size of your team. So scale obviously dictates a lot of that, but what's the trade-off? What's the value of putting someone manual on it to then say, "This isn't fraudulent or not?" So whatever data
Yeah.
points they have, I'd be super interested in, like, how they do their categorization, where they get that data point, and are those data points merchants have today? Or
And
is
why
it all
can't they share it?
reactive and that they're
Yeah.
able to do it? Exactly. Or is it they are able to then take that data and say, If these data points are present at transaction, on platform, wherever it is across, like, the customer experience, to then proactively mitigate some of these risks that could go bad and turn into chargebacks. Like, I don't that's something I don't really know from what you said, and I don't think you might necessarily know that either.
I
So
don't
that's
know it
one
either.
route of,
I
like,
mean, I'm happy
what
to
we could
ask.
do today. Yeah,
Yeah.
is
So
that those data points where they get it. The other one is, like, obviously, some of the networks are thinking about it. MasterCard has theirs, Visa just did their update. What will be the reality? I know there's a lot of confusion within merchants of how do I get, use, and even package this data? Like, putting together compelling evidence, like, just because I have this data is really unknown to a lot of people who don't have the close relationships. If you think about it, most people don't have those close relationships with these large networks, and large networks prioritize their business. If there isn't a big
yeah.
dollar amount tied to the account, then it's very hard for people to get some of this information. And if who's going to read through 165 pages of the most recent update to be like, do I need to do anything? That's why you leverage some of these companies. So it's hard. And you kind of just put your faith in a company almost blindly and say, you know what, you recovered some of it. A lot of these tools, their pricing is like if you win, we win. If you lose, we lose. So there's incentive to try to figure out together and just leverage them. That's the benefit of these types of tools when people are thinking about it. But if I don't really know policy-wise and enforcement, because there's one thing to write the policy. We see policies being discussed for a year or 2 before they're actually put in place, and then there's a grace period before they're gonna actually be enforced. So before you know it, the frauds adapt and change to the policy. So what I really think about it, like, more of enforcement of policies, whatever the policy may be. You're saying SWIFT, like, it's unrealistic for the size and the magnitude to be enforced on, like, the bank level, honestly, for creating something, and then what are you talking about, Swift, like a week, a month, 2 years?
That's what I think. So we were toying around the idea earlier this year of taking confirmed compelling evidence 3.0 wins on the Visa side. Like basically, it was compelling evidence 3.0 representation, and then we won and we were victorious. And then flagging those customers as first party fraud abusers and scoring those customers and their related accounts accordingly, because we know that they're a problematic consumer. Something that we never put into full production, but it was something that we wanted to think about. But here's where like my mind goes with it is like, if the number really is that high, and if we do this and we record this session, there's some logistics that need to go into that before we get that done. And we get that episode out. I'm happy to ask them how they're arriving at this number. But they're confident and they are, then I think that we need to start looking at taking their authentication, however they're doing it, and having some sort of legal repercussion to the cardholder for participating in this. Just like if I was really sure. out of a store down the street from me. But we start looking at things like, so you take your TC40 or your safe data, and you see the chargebacks on there that were authenticated via, EMV 3D secure, that you never actually saw the chargeback. Those transactions that were authenticated, I think that if they're authenticated by the issuer successfully using session data from the end user session, and it could be confirmed that that is the actual, and that end user needs to be rebuild for it, not the issuer even. As much as I get frustrated with issuers and them never wanting to ever hold the bag ever, I think that it needs to go back to the customer plus fees. I think there needs to be some sort of financial repercussion to disincentivize consumers for participating in this level of behavior because it's getting out of control. It really is. Like people
Yeah,
always talk
like
about
a
smash and
restock,
grabs.
like the idea of restocking fees is kind of like the concept there.
I mean, I gotta pay chargeback fee to try and win my own money. Like
Yeah,
why shouldn't a customer, like, look, if you want to go through this process, there's a $25 fee. And if you win, you get that $25 back. But if you lose your actual money on your chargeback plus the $25 fee. Plus, you can never issue a chargeback ever again as long as you're an account holder, something like that. Because like screw up. And like, so do you want to blow your wad on a fake fraud claim for potentially not being able to do that if it really happens to you? Like, I don't know. There has to be something in there. And I'm happy to be that guy
I
that
always
that
play
that
devil's
freaks out.
advocate. So like I do like the strictness. I am stricter on policies from my own perspective. I play devil's advocate. I play with myself. Sometimes I hate my own self
Whoa,
because of it.
whoa.
But where what you just said though, where I went to is
Mm,
like, all right, a lot of when some companies are stricter on fighting all chargebacks. And if a customer does legitimately say this is fraudulent, it is a true claim. They're willing to say, I'm willing to risk this 25 because I know without a doubt this wasn't me. Then the merchant fights it, has enough evidence, and for whatever that day, the it is ruled in the favor of the merchant, then there's a heavy penalization for the consumer. So you think about it like that's where like the nuances of enforcement become challenging
yep.
of like the accuracy of representation and how it's reviewed for consistency.
Start to push people to more secure authentication methods when they're going through the checkout process. So using things like forcing 3D secure only transactions for online transactions, tokenized like wallets,
Yeah.
digital wallets that have liability shifts of some kind, or in-store dipping the chip, never redoing fallback into swipe. I mean, which pretty much everybody complained about EMV and how long it was going to take. I can't think of a time in recent memory where I've had to do a swipe. Like we all just moved on with our lives and it works just fine. So there has to be a way that we can get better authentication adoption as well on a more wide scale, realistic. Essentially, if a consumer really wants to go down that, like they have to be like hell bent to go down that fraud claim because the authentication was so robust that likely they were really standing there. So like, are you sure about that? Like that sort of thing. So,
Love it. What else you got top of mind this week?
well, I think I'm going to put this question actually up into house fraud. Let's let the people decide what they want to do. I'm going to put my opinion about how I want to cut off people's hands for doing type scenario there. But this week, I have a send coming up next week.
Yeah.
In when this episode comes out in New York, I'm going to be doing my show live. So I'm a little nervous about that because play with the mics to not get sound to come from the other, like
Yep.
directly across the table. You have to basically take out all of your preamps. Oh, dude, you know what? I bought one of those SM7 DB mics, like the new fancy ones that has the preamp
Yep.
built into it, kind of like these ones have. It was like defective. Now I sent it back. It's like lost in transit. So I had to like pay to reorder a regular SM7B instead of getting my credit. So I'm gonna have like the world's biggest Amazon credit now. But
Let's see how
I
that
like
goes.
microphone. What about you? What are you doing on
I
this
can
week
talk
while we
lost
wrap
in
up?
transit next week. Well, I guess we might reschedule a little bit next week, but I do
Monday.
have lost in transit. Oh yeah, yeah, Monday. We'll still record next week. I got a lost in transit if you remember. And then it's actually an article came out. I was actually thinking about this. I was gonna save it for our other show, but we haven't scheduled that one in a minute. But there's this company who's been in the news for facilitating fraud, where I kept applying to them, and I kept getting interviews. No, before this, and I kept getting rejected from them. So I tried and I applied. This is earlier in my career, so it just kind of was like for lower level fraud work, but I don't have them tied to my resume and
That's
they
probably
don't
good.
have. But yeah, what else before we hop off today? Anything else?
I don't have a whole lot because it's my birthday and I got eyes on dinner and on my big party this weekend. So and then just trying to prep for next week because New York is that's a long ways to go. So I would
Yeah,
definitely
it's a
love to talk
solid
about
trip
this
for you.
lost. I think logistic fraud we never. I think nobody really talks about as much. So let's definitely talk about that next. I'm curious what your opinions on it are.
Yeah, it ended with a USPSIS, whatever the letters are, sting operation. So it's pretty cool to be a part of that with, and then I had another one where we had ex FBI was within our company. And that was my first interrogation with an ex FBI agent. So it was me and him. So I can kind of share two different stories around physical goods.
We're doing that for sure, and then hopefully I'll have some results from our House of Fraud poll about how hard we start cutting hands, man. We're gonna start cutting virtual
I'm
hands
always
here.
curious
It's gonna
about
happen.
people's personalities of that because it really seems to be when it comes to it, it's either very lenient or very strict. There's not many people who end up enforcing more in the middle ground, so I'm curious to see.
We're about to find out. All right, everybody. We'll share the results next week, and we'll talk about some shipping fraud.
See y'all.